We're very excited to have Jeremy Tarr with us as our closing speaker to give an update on current and future directions in state policy making and share some positive efforts being undertaken to address climate change. Jeremy is Senior Advisor for Climate Change Policy for North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. Before accepting this appointment, he served as the North Carolina's Governor's Office Policy Advisor for Energy, Environment, Transportation, Climate Change, and Natural Resources. So it was good when he just got into the climate change advice. He was wearing a lot of hats back then. Jeremy oversees implementation of Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80, which is North Carolina's commitment to address climate change and transition to a clean energy economy. He serves as Governor Cooper's designee on the North Carolina Climate Change Interagency Council and represents North Carolina in the U.S. Climate Alliance. He also serves on the Executive Committee of the National Council on Electricity Policy. Jeremy previously worked at the US EPA, where he helped finalize the Clean Power Plan and led development of the plan's rate-based model rule. Prior to federal employment, he worked on national climate and energy policy at Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions at Duke University and served as a law clerk for the Honorable Patricia Timmons Goodson at the Supreme Court of North Carolina. Jeremy is a graduate of Davidson College and UNC School of Law. We welcome Jeremy to NC Breathe. I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, June. Really appreciate the invitation to be here and participate in this conference. As you know, it's really a unique conference that is, looks at climate through a health lens, which is great. Climate change is one of the largest threats to public health that we face, and I know that's been discussed throughout the conference. So it's unfortunate that more climate discussions don't put health impacts front and center, but this one's really gotten it right for years now. And especially also appreciate the emphasis on equity and justice that you've put on the conference. Good to be here with each of you. I think, like most of you, I wrestle with climate change daily, whether it be the threats of climate change, policies, tactics, public awareness, the impacts that we're all facing. But recently I've found myself thinking more and more about the role of climate change in the lives of children today. I have 3 kids. My twins were born in 2010, my third a few years later. And so, while I and hopefully I and many of you will live to 2050 and know whether we reach net zero emissions by then, our children and grandchildren are going to be here much longer. My kids are going to be 90 in 2100. So that means that the climate impacts over the next 80 years will really define their lives. And about a year ago in 2020, the North Carolina Climate Science Report was released, really led by Ken Kunkel and his team at NC KICS and many other climate experts that we're fortunate to have in North Carolina. Released the Climate Science Report, and it summarizes, what climate impacts could look like in North Carolina. One of the takeaways that sticks with me is that we're projected to see temperatures increase 6 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit from today's levels by 2100, unless we take significant steps to decarbonize. Will our kids be able to work outside, mowing lawns and painting houses, like I did in the summer? Are they going to be able to eat the same foods or vacation, at the same North Carolina beaches? Is it going to be too hot to live in urban centers? These are tough things to kind of think about. What will it be like to live in North Carolina where sea level continues to rise, high tide flooding is a daily occurrence. We potentially see stronger hurricanes. There's increased frequency of severe thunderstorms. Snow days are a thing of the past potentially. Where we're seeing increased coastal flooding from storm surges, we're seeing inland flooding from extreme precipitation events. but also we're seeing more intense and severe droughts and wildfires. You know, the future could look really different than what we're aware of and experience today. I think Governor Cooper's approach to climate starts by recognizing recognizing our best scientific understanding of climate change, and then taking a holistic approach to addressing the challenge. This means, you know, at the state level, having an all-of-government approach. Climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It involves health, you know, our economy, transportation, cultural resources, and on and on. And it's not something that state government, you know, obviously can solve on its own. There's a tremendous amount of local government leaders showing leadership, business community, advocacy community, researchers, you know, justice advocates, and folks that are really working on climate from all angles, and we need all of that. So I think the first sort of theme to our approach on climate change is sticking with science and taking a holistic approach. Second, we're really trying to move forward in a step-by-step manner, right? So you'll see, you have seen or are seeing us, you know, governor set targets, develop strategic plans, implement those plans, and doing these things through a mix of executive orders, task forces, stakeholder processes, and implementing the policies. I think a third theme for our climate work is engaging communities. I mean, we have to engage folks and other stakeholders where they are at all stages of policy development. And then fourth, you know, we can address climate change and enhance economic opportunities for North Carolinians. The transition to clean energy economy, it creates good paying jobs, it creates economic opportunities for communities. North Carolina, you know, we're a leader. We're you know, #1 on the East Coast in manufacturing. You know, that leadership, our leadership in finance industry and clean energy, and our university system are all assets that we can use and leverage so that we are a leader and remain a leader in transitioning to a clean energy economy. You know, we're also seeing businesses, when they're looking at expanding or locating in North Carolina, asking more and more about our clean energy or clean transportation policies, comparing those with other states, because their executives, their customers, their you know, their employees want to live in a place that's aligned with their values. So we're working a lot with Commerce and Secretary Sanders' leadership to really ensure a strong clean energy sector going forward, which means solar, wind, offshore wind, battery storage, and on and on. You know, I can't help talk to this group without thinking about the past year and how all of us have been coping with COVID-19. It's affected each of our lives and all of our loved ones really, really deeply. So just to those of you who work in the public health field and the medical community, just really want to thank you for your leadership and your sacrifices and your professionalism throughout the pandemic. You know, as I think about the relationship in climate and health, so many lessons come to mind from our experience with COVID that I think can inform our approach on climate going forward. In the interest of time, I'll just mention 4, but others may come to your mind. First, you know, we ignore science at our own peril, right? You know, ignoring science only makes things worse. So whether that manifests in the number of cases or infections or the pace of climate change. Just recently, I saw that in 1950, the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide was about 315 parts per million. Last Saturday, the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii recorded a concentration of 421 parts per million. That's the highest level in human history. You know, more of the same isn't going to preserve a habitable planet. The planet's going to be fine. It'll still be here. It's us that we need to, you know, think about. I think second lesson is that early action's better than delayed action. You know, the longer we delay, the deeper the required trajectory of emission reductions that we're going to need. The more lives are going to be impacted and the more severe the impacts. So early action is also better for our economy. I mean, we've seen the economic impacts of COVID on our family budgets, on our economy at large, and we've seen the impacts of devastating floods and hurricanes and other events on the North Carolina economy. Reducing emissions, building resilience helps create North Carolina jobs, and it strengthens our economic opportunities. Third, like COVID, climate change has disproportionate impacts on people of color, indigenous communities, low-income communities, and it really highlights and exacerbates our society's inequities. We know that climate impacts vulnerable communities first and worst, as someone told me recently, and that all of our fates are intertwined. So we have to think about others, and we have to protect the most vulnerable among us. In addition, solutions to climate change have to touch all people. You know, the benefits of transitioning to a clean energy economy needs to help us create a more equitable society. And finally, I'll say, you know, whether it's COVID or climate, the good news is that the future is in our own hands. I mean, just as we have control over whether we wear masks or socially distance and wash our hands, we also have control over the degree of climate impacts by deciding how much we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So when I think about the overwhelming future potentially of climate change, I also think about, you know, what gives me optimism is that we're in control of our own destiny for the most part. So with that, let me mention a handful of things that sort of will give you a flavor of how the governor and his administration have been approaching climate change. For some of you, this may be redundant, but hopefully not all of it. In 2018, the governor signed Executive Order 80, which was really a landmark executive order to transition North Carolina to a clean energy economy and help us address greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. It set goals for the state to achieve by 2025, 40% reduction in statewide greenhouse gas emissions, 80,000 zero emission vehicles on our roads, and achieving a 40% improvement in state building efficiency. It also established the North Carolina Climate Change Council. It directed DEQ to develop, to release our first greenhouse gas inventory in almost a decade, which they did. And it directed the development of a handful of strategic plans. So one on clean energy, the Clean Energy Plan, one on a zero emission vehicle plan, a motor fleet zero emission vehicle plan to help us transition to electric vehicles in our state motor fleet. Commerce to develop a workforce assessment so that we understand and are prepared for the implications of transitioning our economy to clean energy and clean transportation from a workforce perspective. And also to develop a resilience plan, a risk assessment and resilience plan that was released almost a year ago now. A second kind of pillar of our approach on climate is really equity and justice. You know, all aspects of climate change have equity implications, whether it's non-action, the pace of action, how we reduce emissions, how we build resilience, and how we make decisions about to do those things. So we have included environmental justice and climate justice in our strategic planning documents, many of the ones that I just mentioned a second ago. And it's been really significant to do that to ensure that equity is a part of every conversation. You know, to some, it sounds like, oh, great, you included a chapter and, you know, on environmental justice, but I think I'd say it's much more than that. You know, by developing and going through these robust environmental justice discussions and developing recommendations in the reports, it's really helped the end product. It's really helped deepen all of our understanding of justice and equity and establish it as just an ongoing part of the conversation and value and priority that we all need to have. I think prominent inclusion in the of discussions of equity and recommendations in the Clean Energy Plan and in the Resilience Plan. Also have just ensured that that language is documented and the concepts are documented in writing in these foundational strategic reports. And it also provides just a reference point for us to check in on ourselves and to be held accountable by others. I think just another point on equity and justice is that many of you, I think, are aware that Secretary Regan, former Secretary Regan at DEQ, established the Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board to advise DEQ on various matters. And over the past year, Governor Cooper established the Andrea Harris Task Force, which is really established to address the social and environmental and economic and health disparities in communities of color that we've seen have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. There's a subcommittee on environmental justice, which is making recommendations. And I think a lot of the recommendations and the discussions there, inform conversations beyond those just based on COVID. And then the governor established the task force on racial equity and criminal justice to help make sure we're better understanding and addressing issues related to criminal justice policies and processes that disproportionately affect communities of color. Other sort of themes on our climate actions are, distributing our Volkswagen settlement funds, which were $92 million for North Carolina. DEQ is, I think, finishing up sort of the first tranche, which was around 30 million. And then is working to develop our plan for distributing the remaining 67 million to help prioritize clean energy, clean transportation projects. Offshore wind is another theme that I think is getting a lot of attention now. It really offers a unique economic and clean energy opportunities for the state. The Clean Energy Plan makes recommendations on offshore wind, recognizing that it can really help us diversify our clean energy mix in North Carolina. And just a couple of weeks ago, the North Carolina Department of Commerce released a supply chain and infrastructure study for offshore wind. And it was really eye-opening for me. I mean, it projects that there's going to be 41 gigawatts of offshore wind along the Atlantic coast by 2035. And that's going to involve $140 billion of investment, $100 billion of which North Carolina can address through tier 1 manufacturing, supply chain manufacturing, and operation and maintenance activities. So we're in conversations with the federal government to prioritize offshore wind off of the North Carolina coast. And so that continues to be an ongoing topic. I think there's been some discussion already on the North Carolina Resilience Plan, but suffice it to say it includes the North Carolina Climate Science Report, which if you haven't taken a look at, I highly recommend. Think of it as a downscaled national climate assessment for North Carolina specifically. And the Resilience Plan identifies a number of strategies for improving North Carolina's resilience. It also identifies a number of kind of risks, climate risks that we're facing in North Carolina by sector, including health. Just a couple of other current issues I think you may be aware, you may be interested in. On the sort of energy side, the Clean Energy Plan had two large recommendations which were implemented over the past year. One is for Duke University to convene a stakeholder process to evaluate some key clean energy policies for reducing carbon emissions in the power sector, including things like a clean energy standard and RGGI, which I know Clean Air Carolinas has been a part of, coal retirements and adding a carbon adder and utility planning. The other process is really thinking about modernizing our energy regulatory systems in North Carolina. And together, there's sort of an ongoing discussion at the legislature and among stakeholders about, how to really chart the path forward for North Carolina on clean energy. The second one I'll mention is the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is 4 jurisdictions signed a memorandum of understanding last December, announcing their intent to implement this program. Governor Cooper didn't sign that MOU, but signed a separate joint statement with about a dozen other states indicating that we're looking at the program and are considering it. So if you don't know much about it, it's essentially a program to reduce transportation emissions and invest in creating new kind of clean, equitable transportation opportunities. So something to look into and welcome your input on that. Also will draw your attention to the governor's budget, which he recently released. Won't go through very many, but there are quite a few really exciting budget items in there with respect to clean energy and a healthy North Carolina. So there's programs, investments for land conservation and parks. There's a clean energy communities and clean energy schools program that would receive $50 million to help schools and communities achieve access to clean energy and clean transportation. There are, equity and justice positions in multiple agencies in state government. There's a over $20 million program to help ensure that low-income folks have access to clean energy, whether it be energy efficiency or other types of opportunities. And then the final thing I'll mention is that I think a strong theme going forward is going to be federal funding. We're aware of the ARP, the COVID package, and the infrastructure bill that the Biden-Harris administration are moving forward. So there are potentially opportunities to use new federal funding to advance some of the priorities that we've been talking about here. So just open invitation to share your insights and recommendations on how we can put those opportunities to best use. With that, I'll stop. I know it was a lot, but I just want to give you kind of a highlight of the breadth and kind of the scope of things that we're looking at the state level. And again, a lot of these are ongoing processes and planning and implementing. And so just feel free to reach out to me or others that if you'd like to get involved.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. As I said throughout the conference, I was taking a lot of notes, but couldn't write fast enough, so I'm glad we're recording this. We do have a couple questions for you. One is, what is the impact of offshore wind on the ocean ecosystem, if you know that?
Yeah, it's a really important point. With any offshore wind development, before it goes forward, there are processes for identifying conflicting uses or potentially conflicting uses and mitigating those conflicts. So whether it be, migratory, marine mammals, or military activities, tourism interests, shipping, commercial, recreational fishing, et cetera. So where we are is I'll try to be brief, but there are kind of 2 activities happening. One is off Corolla, the Kitty Hawk wind energy area, which has already been deconflicted by the federal government, and Avangrid is in the process of kind of planning and then developing offshore wind in that area in northeast off our northeastern coast. The second is in the southern part of our coast, and the status there is that about, I think in 2014, 2015, BOEM deconflicted 2 areas, which are called Wilmington West and Wilmington East. Recently, the governor asked the federal government to move forward quickly to lease those areas so they can be developed. So before developing those, there will be another look at potentially conflicting uses, including kind of impacts on ecosystems, marine mammals, et cetera. So if the questioner has kind of information that should be considered along those lines, feel free to should reach out to Jennifer Munt at DEQ and share that information with her.
Thank you. Another question is the health system here in North Carolina, or that side of things, involved in the Duke initiative? And I guess this means in the development of that report in terms of the stakeholders and, you know, that collaboration between Duke University and UNC. Were there health stakeholders involved in any of that? Do you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm trying to think back. So there was, the Clean Energy Plan set a target of 70% reduction in power sector greenhouse gas emissions in North Carolina by 2030, and achieving carbon neutrality in the power sector by 2050. So the task of this kind of stakeholder group, I mentioned that the Nicholas Institute at Duke University led, was to evaluate policies, potential policies and combinations to achieve those goals. So I don't recall public health systems being involved in that process. Yeah, so I think the answer is no. I'm pretty sure the answer is no. That process was really, so that process was really focused on kind of thinking through the different policy options and doing economic modeling on the impacts of those, you know, sort of how to achieve the targets in a way that protects reliability, affordability, things like that.
Got it.
The report that just came out does have some kind of projections on NOx and SOx emissions, kind of co-pollutant benefits associated with achieving greenhouse gas reductions by a certain level on certain trajectory. So that may be an angle that's particularly you know, sort of relevant for public health folks.
Mm-hmm. Any other role? As you know, we have medical advocates for healthy air that's very active and very interested in weighing in on these issues. Do you see the health community playing? Are there other avenues for involvement by them?
No, I think our DH at North Carolina HHS, you know, Ben Money, I saw Lauren was involved today, or if not yesterday. I mean, we have great public health experts who get it on climate change and are kind of savvy, not just on the public health side, but just sort of thinking through how to help public health have a voice in this. So I would say, I think more you know, public health community kind of being more vocal on climate is helpful. And so really, you know, would look forward to a conversation to figure out what that looks like and sort of how, right? How to manifest that in different ways at the right point in time. But I'm sort of surprised that public health, you know, like I said at the beginning, isn't sort of more front and center in a lot of the public's mind. And so, but I think it's a really important piece of the conversation because of the credibility of our public health experts and just the substantive fact of the risk that it really provides for our public health. So yeah, I would welcome that conversation.
Yeah, there's a growing interest in many of the hospital systems in North Carolina, including from medical students, to get involved. So we're trying to facilitate that. I know that it's 5 right now. If I could just ask one question about jobs from, you know, wind, offshore wind. Do we have any idea if jobs will be targeted at manufacturing facilities in Eastern North Carolina? And I don't know if we've gotten to that point. I know we probably have manufacturing facilities across the state, but just curious about that.
So yeah, that's the question. And the good news we do have a lot of information on that. And so the commerce study, supply chain study that I mentioned earlier, you know, really the purpose of that is to help us understand a couple things. One, just what's the magnitude of opportunity along the Atlantic coast and along in North Carolina. Second, to understand the different sort of segments of the offshore wind supply chain, and then help us in North Carolina understand which of those segments we can compete most effectively in. And so that report, one of its findings is that North Carolina really does have an opportunity to land major, manufacturing in North Carolina, and that would, be located on our coast. Another thing I think we and this isn't, other states sort of understand is that the offshore wind turbines are so large that they have to be sort of assembled, and some of the larger parts sort of have to be, assembled and then sort of shipped and put together. Like all that has to happen on the coast close to the development.
Right.
Also, the supply chain is so long that it creates economic opportunities, say throughout North Carolina, or development of offshore wind off of Maryland or Virginia, or even up, New York and New Jersey. The supply chain creates economic opportunities for North Carolina right now without additional offshore wind. But when you have that additional offshore wind, it creates even more economic opportunities for the state. And most of those are going to be on the coast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So commerce, so that report, I don't have if you one searches like the North Carolina Department of Commerce offshore wind supply chain, you'll come up with the landing page. And recently, like yesterday, they just released a more kind of specific analysis that looks at potential job creation impacts for offshore wind and kind of net economic output for the state.
Great. We'll make sure we get that report in our conference app, HUVA. But
Great.
I want to thank you again for taking the time to share what's happening at the state level as we move forward to decarbonize the grid and also address health and equity issues that many North Carolinas currently face. So thank you very much. And I'm going to just end with a few closing comments. We all know that we need public policy involved in this, but that the pace of public policy can be slow. We also know that the climate crisis, though, is an emergency, and that so many residents in our state have truly emergency health needs and have had so for decades. So knowing this must motivate all of us from across sectors to move quickly, consistently, and collaboratively on strategies that disrupt the inequities that prevent us from creating a resilient present and future for all North Carolinians. Will Barber yesterday reminded us of Dr. King's quote about being confronted with the fierce urgency of now, and that we need to dare to dream another reality. We hope this conference inspired you with stories of that new reality and challenged you to engage again across sectors, getting out of our comfort zones to build a healthier, more equitable, and more resilient North Carolina. Like Marilyn Marsh Robinson said, we need all hands on deck. So I want to thank Jeremy again for his contribution to this critical conversation, and to all the speakers, really phenomenal speakers, for supporting our collective efforts. And, I want to thank our sponsors again who supported Breathe. Many of them are our current partners. And we do want to keep the conversation going. We encourage all of you, if you're not engaged with Clean Air Carolina, to go to our website, cleanaircarolina.org, really get engaged with us. We need more volunteers, we need more money. So this was a free conference, and we're happy to do that for the community, but we also need more members, have to say that. So the HUVA app will actually be live for the next 6 months. So feel free to share articles, organize meetups on issues you're interested working on. We also will be in touch with you as well. We're building a movement here, and the need is great. So we need all of you. So thank you all for attending NC Breathe 2021. And we hopefully will see you in person next year. Thank you and have a great evening.